Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Game face on.
Yeah,
Game face on.
exactly. Hello and welcome to our discussion about AI and education. Today we have myself, John DiMaria. I work at Digiexam. We have Dr. Nick Jackson with us today, an expert in the topic of AI and ChatGPT. He put out a course in early January, directly after ChatGPT sort of hit the market, that gave educators a leg up in terms of how AI works, how to understand it, and how to incorporate it in your classroom. So we're really happy to have Dr. Nick Jackson here with us today. And beside me, I have my colleague. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Niklas. I'm head of marketing here at Digiexam, and I am lucky enough to be on this call to listen to you two today. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, and thanks, Dr. Nick, or should I call you Nick, or how would you like to be?
You can just call me Nick. Oh,
Nick,
I only
great.
insist that my wife and kids call me doctor. That's all.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's important, so that title, you worked hard for it. So
Yeah, I certainly did. So 8 years part-time, as well as doing a full-time job in education. I qualified last year. I got my PhD last year. So that focused on the empowerment of students with technology. So the idea was that, or the idea that I have, and the message I put out there is that students can play a part in the integration of technology in education, and they can play a part in professional development, and they can play a part in influencing the knowledge and practice of teachers. And that's indeed what my PhD examined. And this comes on the back of running student digital leader schemes in various schools, both in the UK and in Australia, and also assisting people in other parts of the world doing that. I've also worked in the US, and I've worked in India as well in education. I've worked in higher education as an online designer, but spent most of my time in secondary schools in leadership positions, mostly around technology integration, and being that sometimes that go between systems and teaching, but often I'm involved in management of change, pedagogical change, upskilling staff and students in technology and how to work more effectively and more efficiently with technology. But yeah, I have a fascination and a passion as well with how humans respond to technology, and how new versions of technology, or the latest things that happen, new developments, I suppose is the correct term, how they have an effect on people, both students and teachers. But also, I also have a passion for the reality that schools should work beyond their school walls and should integrate with community, both industry and further than that. I hope that's enough for you.
Yeah, that's great, and I think you touch upon some really interesting things here. I mean, obviously your passion and what you've studied and worked with, they all hang together, but that you have this role as a change leader in organizations, and I think like the implementation of technologies, and in that way, I mean, that has a lot to do with getting your staff on board, getting the teachers and the school leaders to understand that these new technologies aren't necessarily maybe a threat, that they have to be rethought. You have to rethink the classroom environment. You have to rethink the educational environment that's there. So that sounds. It sounds really, really interesting. Myself, I also worked a little bit as a what would you call it, an educational developer, with a passion for digitalization, but not on that level. So I've been more of the maybe the grunt work of making sure that training programs go out and that aspect. So I understand. It's
and you also see in that job that realistically your job is far more about humans than it is about the technology.
Yeah, it is. today, we're actually going to talk about a specific technology. We had said previously that we'd like to look at how AI is affecting education, and I mean, ChatGPT is maybe an easy place to begin because that's been the buzzword. So, like, I guess the question is like that I want to ask is what kind of discussion about AI do you observe kind of occurring right now? Because you are really involved in that and in your role and also on social media.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about what dominates the discussion, clearly the whole issue of cheating and the whole issue of banning, I suppose, are the two things that dominate most of the media. But the reality is, if you move in particular circles and you are connected to people who are experimenting in this field, even those people that are working behind the scenes when banning's occurring, there is a lot more going on than just what we see in terms of this technology should be banned, it is banned, why is it banned, it's just going to lead to cheating, how do we deal with cheating and all those kinds of things. Not to say that those issues are not real, and not to say that some of the reasons why banning occurs is not, has some merits to it. Let's not say it's valid, but it has some merits to it, and there's some reasoning behind that. But there's far more going on in the AI space around education than perhaps some people realize. And there's a lot more going on, and that has been going on for quite a while. And what we're seeing in terms of ChatGPT, or in terms of the wider field of chatbots, because we're not just talking about ChatGPT now, we're talking about all manner of chatbots. Then that really is just one version of AI. That's just a language learning model, and there are many other facets of AI that are actually being used and are affecting us right now. And we are using those. They're actually in tools we're using, and we don't even realize. And it's quite interesting when you have those conversations with teachers, as I had one today, where I went, well, do you see that thing on PowerPoint that says designer? When you click on that, it's reading the words off your slide and then suggesting images and designs based on the words that are in there. That's AI. Is it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the AI integration is right there on a very low level, not to mention some of the more sophisticated research ideas that are going on that just nothing to do with chatbots or language learning models at all.
Yeah, and I think it's exactly like you said. It's very interesting that if we look at it, AI has sort of like almost not necessarily snuck in under the radar, but in a way it has. The autocorrects that you're seeing in like you said, Word documents or Google Docs, the things that the suggestions in your emails that says, when you're writing your little like tagline, oh, sincerely, or hope to hear from you, and then all of a sudden it fills in from you soon, and you're like, exactly. Oh, great. It's those kinds of things that you're like, you don't really, they're very subtle. And I think that what we're seeing now is that people have kind of woken up to the reality of it, in that this was something that was threatening, or maybe not threatening is the right word, but challenging a pillar of the educational system, like you said, cheating, plagiarism, particularly like homeworks and assignments. And I feel like right now I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but
how would you compare the two? I mean, before ChatGPT, like the discussion on AI in education then compared to now.
And that's an interesting point right there, Niklas. And I think that I go back to a conversation I had with my dad. My dad's 80 this year, yeah. And I can remember, it seems like years ago, but it's only 3 weeks ago, showing him ChatGPT, between Christmas and New Year. What was that, 4 weeks ago? Something like that. It seems like a lifetime. Yeah. And showing him it and going, look at this. And this was after a conversation that we were at some friend's house the night before, and he was having a conversation with a friend of ours who's an engineer in a startup, that kind of thing. And they were having a conversation about how hard it is to set up a clean room. So a clean room, it's somewhere to do experiments on. look, I'm not an engineer. I've probably no idea what I'm talking about here, but I get the idea that it's got to be clean in terms of you can't have anything that's going to mess up the experiment that goes on in there. So setting that up was such a challenge. And so the guy who's currently working in a startup now was talking about how hard it was to source out how to do this, then get people, and get it to work. So even right from the theory of doing it to put it into practice was quite a number of steps. And my dad was relaying back to when he was in engineering, talking about, yeah, I can remember doing that myself and how hard that was and da-da-da. So when I showed him ChatGPT, I said, do you remember that conversation you had last night? Well, I was listening to that. Okay, how to set up a clean room. And I typed it in my phone, and I put my phone in front of him, and it just listed all the things he needed. And he went, that took me months to figure that out.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't have the internet then. But
no, of course
even
not.
with the internet, listening to our friend who's done it recently, again, it still took a serious amount of time to troll through the internet to figure out how, and then you have to go through the next steps of figuring out, buying all the things, whatever you need. So those steps are listed, and he looked at it and he went, and not only did he say that, he said, actually, that's most of what it's saying there is right as well. So it was not only the fact that it was there at your fingertips. It was the fact that most of the content in there was something that you could rely on. Most, I said not all, but you could rely on it. And then the second thing he said, I can't remember what it was then, or we were doing a few other things. He said, but this is just going to stop everybody learning. So that was an interesting statement, wasn't it? So he'd already seen this side of it, which is how useful is this, how this changes things in a positive way, but he'd already gone, hang on, big red flag here. Why would you bother learning anything when this can teach you everything?
Yeah.
So we've already got that dichotomy going on, haven't we? And this is nothing to do with the idea of assessments, and it's probably something to do with banning, but I don't believe it actually is. I don't believe anybody out there has banned things because of what my dad said there. Well, definitely not because of what my dad said. But that idea that, it's going to stop learning, I don't believe that's the basis of banning, but maybe it is. Maybe it is in some schools, maybe it is in the odd school here and there, but if we look at, like, in Australian terms, it's happened in most of the states here, across the country. Then I don't believe that's the reason they've made it. And indeed, that's not the reason they've said that they're banning it. So, and if you look at universities, mostly the reasons they've said it is because of the cheating dilemma that they've got. So, so I thought that was an interesting example of the way people respond or did respond in the first place. That's different from what you read in the media. Yeah.
I think what could be interesting is if we, because now we've talked a little bit about ChatGPT and AI, and I think it'd be nice to maybe talk a little bit about how it actually works, or what is, at the base level, like what is ChatGPT, and like myself, it was kind of fun because I'm not a programmer. I'm a trained educator, so it was fun to just throw that into ChatGPT and ask it, and I think that's probably one of the most often asked questions that it's receiving right now.
Really?
What is ChatGPT, or how does it work? I thought about it, at least the curious maybe individual would probably ask those things. I don't know, maybe. I'm sure you asked it. I'm absolutely positively sure of that. But
well, you can read it on the course, and that was its own answer.
Exactly.
But to simplify it, look, I'm not an AI expert. I'm not sat there coding AI. I'm not, but I have expertise in understanding it in educational spheres. But to simplify exactly what it is we're talking about what sits behind ChatGPT. ChatGPT is just a front end. What sits behind it is OpenAI, and this is several iterations on from the beginnings of OpenAI. Now, I was playing with OpenAI before ChatGPT came along, and so were other people out there in education and wider field. And some people were actually doing some weird and wonderful things, but nothing on the scale of what we see now. And we can talk about why I think that is. But OpenAI that sits behind it is basically a language learning model, what we call an LLM. So what that does is that's being fed lots and lots of data, largely from Wikipedia and some other internet sources. So it's been fed all this data from the internet, which you can imagine the scale of doing that. It's huge. All that data is up until 2021. So there's nothing from the last couple of years in there.
Right.
And then it's not learning anymore. People think it is. People think it's actually learning right now from what you say. That's not actually true. What's happened is it's done all its learning. What we're doing is, what ChatGPT is a way of collecting data on our use of the system. So that's not actually feeding into making better connections. That's feeding into how we use it. So they made a decision. So you've got this language learning model, and then it has things like what we call transformers on top of it, and different technologies that sit on top of it. So what they do is all that data's in there is when you type in certain words, it looks at those words and it tries to guess what the next words are based on algorithms it has as to what these words mean and how they connect to other things based on what's happened before. So if you say cat, for instance, it's going to know that it's going to be able to connect cat with fur and meow and whatever else cat connects with, feline and all sorts of different words like that. So it's going to be able to make certain guesses, and it's pretty good at guessing, so it's pretty advanced algorithm.
Yeah.
It's going to guess what it should be coming up with next. And obviously, the more words you put in there, the more connections it can make and the more accurate it should be. Right. So even now, I'm having discussions with people who are using ChatGPT all the time, educators especially, and they're going, oh, you mean I should feed in like really complex prompts? I'm like, yeah, as much as you can put in, not simple questions, as much as you can put in as possible, because then it's going to be able to make these connections. So that's basically how it works. So ChatGPT on the front end of it, as I say, is feeding into that system how we're using it. And apparently there are people sat there who are processing the data that goes into it, looking at our use, probably in third world countries this is happening because they're lesser paid. This is happening, and they're processing that data and they're looking at that. However, what's interesting in that, and I'm not going to reveal how you do this, but there are a number of hacks out there that allow you to take away how ChatGPT works. And if you put those in, it somehow gives you data from the last 2 years, and it somehow removes the rules. So it's very interesting, this argument of there's nothing in from 2021, but yet you can get it to tell you there is things from 2021. So I'm a bit unclear about how that's working. Maybe there's ongoing development that's behind in another way, and you're accessing that. I don't know. Maybe there's a parallel development going on. I don't know.
I mean, naturally, we're speaking a lot about like ChatGPT right now, but for education, is there other AIs out there that we should keep track of?
Yeah, I mean the whole image generation genre is absolutely fascinating. So, I mean, for me, tons of fun to play with, but there is a serious side to that, and I've seen some brilliant use cases of how people are using that in industry, and we're beginning to see educators use image generators as well. And so image generators, if you don't know, basically the idea is you can put in different text prompts into the system, be it things like Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, DALL-E. These are ones that are out there. And you put these in, and based on your prompts, it will create often a few images, and you can choose one of them, and then you can start to enhance it and change it. You can further engineer the prompts to change the image, make it better, get it more bespoke to how you want it. That's the basic idea with those. So that sounds like, oh, well, that's quite creative and a bit of fun, but we're starting to see people sitting day after day engineering these prompts to really get high quality, sophisticated ranges of images that relate to particular vocations. So an example that I have seen recently, which I really liked, was a marketing guy talking about how this is going to save so much in pitching an idea, because he can create, say, like it's he brought the idea of a concept car for a particular manufacturer.
Yeah.
So he put in this concept car, it created the image of the concept car, and then he was able to position that images in different places around the world, as well as on Mars and things like that. Now, to go and do that in Photoshop would have taken him more time, but he was actually pitching the idea of these are the stills for a video. So if we're going to do a video shoot of this concept car, where would it look best? So from a marketing perspective, to go with that pitch, he's already positioning different ideas and going to a customer, or being able to go to a customer and go, okay, your car, this is how I see it. This is how I see it's going to look best in this environment, and those kinds of things. So if you bring that back to education, imagine the power of that for, you know, a 15-year-old student in a school being able to do that. And this 15-year-old student is probably going, well, you know, before that I can't draw.
Right.
So if you're not assessing the drawing, if the drawing is not the skill, you're trying to assess that marketing, that ideation, that design, and the skill is not about the drawing, then why do we have to have low level ideas or low quality content when we can use these tools to create high quality content, which has got to be more engaging for a student and more fit for purpose?
Yeah, definitely. And
so
I think like, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so another twist on that, if you look at it in terms of design, if you're doing what we call design and tech here, it might be called design elsewhere, industrial design, that kind of thing. You can get kids to ideate on different, say we're doing a phone design, let's ideate on different phone designs, use these image generators to come up with concept phones, how they're going to look different ways, you know, as well as doing all the hand drawings and those kinds of things. You might value those skills as well, but they can come up with the ideas and then they can prototype them. And we've even got AI that can then create 3D vector models from these that go to a 3D printer.
Right.
So, and I suppose the argument then becomes, but how much are you taking away from the learning? We're back to what my dad said originally. Well, it depends, doesn't it? There's two ways of looking at that. Maybe there are parts of that you value and you should hold on to that AI shouldn't do. But if we've got people out in industry doing this now, by the time these kids leave in school, we're going to have more people out in industry to do that. So we're back to that thing, and I've just read it today where somebody said AI is not going to replace your job. It's people who know how to use AI that are going to replace your job. That's the reality.
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of this, what you're talking about here, really speaks to the role of education at its core. It's preparing those students for things that they're going to encounter that we don't really know what they'll look like yet. You know, basically preparing them for future scenarios. And if we're not giving them the chance, I mean, if we're not giving them that chance to test things that are present today, they will likely not test them, or at least not test them and try them in a way that they're able to have someone guide them in the learning process about it. You know, what is this really used for? How should we think about it? What are, you know, can I dig deeper? Can I be challenged? Because otherwise it ends up being this whole, I have a really fancy object in front of me. I see that it's fancy, but I don't really understand all of the functionalities behind it. I almost think of like, you know, an example is my children with smartphones. You know, with their mobile phone, they use it for playing video games and calling each other and, you know, and chatting, but they don't necessarily understand all of how it works and really the true power of what's sitting inside the palm of their hand. And I think that's that whole, maybe tying it back here, that if we don't allow students to use these AIs in the educational setting, that we're doing them more or less a disservice.
And I think that plays into the whole phone thing, doesn't it? John, you know, the reality is I'm in a country here and I live in a state here in South Australia, and I don't know if you know this is happening. They've just brought in a ban on mobile phones in public schools, all public schools. And they get this little satchel that they have to put it in. They have to put the phone into, which stops it being used. You know, and I'm going, this is just completely bizarre, isn't it? But the reality of this is it's sleepwalking. That's how I term it. We've been sleepwalking into the situation we have now. How long have we had smartphones for?
Yeah,
You know, we've had smartphones for 15, 20 years now.
Yeah.
And we're only now going, I tell you what, we'll ban them then, because it's becoming an issue we can no longer deal with. And that comes down to exactly what you talked about there is, did we ever really consider these things? Were we ever proactive? Did we ever really think about what's happening here? Did we ever educate kids about how they should be behaving with their phones? Did we ever talk about how phones work and why why apps are made like they are to make to make them more attractive? And we do some of that, of course we do, but it's a bit reactive, isn't it? And it's very low level.
It is this that we've left that. I say,
society.
Society has basically left that generation to their own devices. Amidst all of it, knowing that, okay, I can use these devices, I can use AI, I can use my phone for these particular things with basically an adult understanding, and that builds that having these ethics and morals already established. Without kind of carrying them down or educating.
And that there is exactly what drives my passion in AI, is that I'm determined for that not to happen. So I'm determined in two ways. I'm determined for us not to allow that sleepwalking into a similar situation, but I'm also determined that the old concept of AI and how AI can be used in education doesn't become somebody else's conversation and somebody else's selling point. I know that you guys, that's where you work, you make money out of education. I get that, and I get the importance of that. But realistically, when we look back in history at Web 2 and those kinds of things, that became horrible in different ways, and it became really disappointing. It had potential for change and it didn't happen. So I'm determined that this stays in the power, or a certain amount of the power stays in the hands of the educators. And that was a reason for putting out the course that I did, and a reason for me to keep championing this cause, because teachers know what's happening in schools. They know what affects their practice. They know what affects the learning of students. And if you take that away from it and you allow systems to take over, or you allow people who want to make money out of these situations, then you take away a lot of the reality and the authenticity of what should be going on. And you take away the fact that this isn't about AI. This is actually about the effects of AI, which has some deep-rooted knock-on effects, or some deep-rooted challenges, as you talked about before, to how teaching and learning happens.
Right. And I think for us, that's also the reason why we want to have these kinds of talks, and what our focus has been is to actually open up the discussion for educators, and not let, because it is easy for technology or developers of technologies to just run amok, because they of course know what's happening behind the scenes with their applications and with their product, and understand where the limitations are, and also how powerful it can become. But really, it like you said, it sort of has to have this check and balance, that educators also need to be involved, and they also have to understand the effects, in order to also be able to ask the right questions when they meet with educational technology providers, so that they're not unprepared. So I think that's sort of where we're at.
Yeah, and I do think I do, and I hope this is a hope, but I don't have any hardcore evidence of this, but I will say that I think that educational technology providers are a lot more savvy now as to the need to have educators involved and to have open discussions with them. Whereas when Web 2 was around, there were a lot more people, for want of a better phrase, sharks. You know, there were a lot more people who just quick buck, don't really care, hard sell on products, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, it doesn't really do the job. You can have 50 interactive whiteboards because you really do need 50 interactive whiteboards. Yeah. Yeah, we're back to that idea, aren't we?
Yeah,
exactly.
So, I do think we've moved on. But it's interesting, though. I am seeing some supposedly AI tools that are being quickly put out there that, have got some interesting pedagogical flaws, I'd say, or I have some doubts about them. But I think that's going to happen anyway, isn't it? When you get something that comes as quick as this, people are going to rapidly prototype. They're going to skin things. They're going to put it out there, and hopefully they'll disappear. And I think a lot of these ones will disappear. They can't possibly operate on the scale they're coming out at the moment. But what I hope we'll be left with is some quality tools that enhance the way we operate, both in terms of education and organizations, business, marketing, whatever area you're left with, and they'll have a sound basis, and they'll be working with the industries that they provide for to make their tools better. And look, products that are successful that are out there, that's ultimately how they work. Every product that I've ever worked with that's successful, that's the way it works.
Yeah. Let's go. No, I was thinking like you said something in there about the role of educators, and I think that's and the effect of AI that it's having on education. I'm just wondering, like, how do you perceive the role of the educator as being different now as an effect of AI, or is it that the role of the educator is the same? One of the reasons I'm asking is I actually wrote a little excerpt, or what do you want to call it? Not an article, but just sort of a commentary. And I thought about that. I thought, like, oh, this is maybe interesting. Is it changing? I don't know if I perceive it as that, but I could be. I mean, I could be wrong.
I think it depends on how. I think it depends on how you then.
Yeah.
The question is that, but I think it depends on how you have been up to this point as an educator.
Yeah.
So the question I keep asking people, or one of the early questions I ask in the various people I work with, both in the place I work and when I'm working outside with other people, and indeed posing it even in higher education, it's the same question. Obviously, in higher education, it's a bit different because the scale's different, but it comes down to that thing of going, okay, if you're saying that AI in the form of chatbots starts to challenge the idea that the student's work could be their own, or you don't know whether they've actually learned from using those AI tools, and that could be about chatbots or not about chatbots, then how is your practice, or what ways does your practice need to be adjusted to make sure that you are aware that they have used chatbots, or that they have learned from chatbots or any other AI technology? So, to give you a crude example, if you're the sort of teacher that sits behind a desk and doesn't engage with students during that learning process, or minimally engages during that learning process, and you don't really see that student's work until you get some summative assessment at the end of a period of time, you're running a huge risk that piece of work you see is not theirs, it's not their voice, and you don't know that because you don't know what their voice is.
No, exactly.
So being involved in how they work and watching students, how they work in a class of 20, 30, whatever, and seeing that, you're going to minimize the capacity of the student, or the chance of the student getting away with going, I did all this work and then I'm just use a chatbot for this bit here in the assess piece. You're going to limit that chance. Now, as I said, on scale for a university, that's more challenging, isn't it? Because if they've got X number of hundreds of students on a course, and they're not turning up to physical lectures or whatever, they're turning up to some tutors. As an academic, you don't see them in the tutors see them. The tutors get around them all. If they're working online, how does that work online? So it has its own complexities. But I think in a school environment, it comes down to those realities. Now, in different subjects, that works in different ways. And in different schools, different class sizes, that's going to be more challenging. Of course it is. In a school that has more challenging behavior, that's also going to be more challenging.
Yeah.
But it does come down to those practices. If you're constantly monitoring, constantly having conversations, looking at the way a student writes, if it's based on writing, then you're going to see their work, and you're going to see that jump. You're going to see you're going to hear the voice change when AI language learning models and chatbots are used, and you'd expect to be able to tell in different forms of AI as well. You say, for instance, a video creator, you can tell it more easier than that, and you can tell more easy in an image generator. I mean, I don't think it's very difficult to see where something's being created by AI compared to something created by Photoshop, unless some kid's got some amazing Photoshop skills, you know?
Right,
so
right, yeah.
So if you're talking in terms of chatbots, then, you know, it's about that. It's about that working with kids. So it's about sitting alongside, working with students, going, I know where your work's at. So when you're talking about changing practice, it all depends on what your current practice is. If it's turn to page 65 in the textbook, do that, do those questions, hand it in, here's your homework, do this, and you sat there behind your ivory desk at the front of the class, then good luck.
Yeah. I mean, we've definitely seen some different response to AI and ChatGPT since November. How do you think an educator, and this is to both of you, to respond on AI? How should they respond to new technology like AI?
If you talk about a holistic response, I think we've got to learn from our mistakes with the phones. It goes back to then. We can't bury our heads in the sand. If we do that, we're going to be faced with giving people little satchels to put their phone in when they come to school each day. Let's put your AI in a little virtual satchel and store it away somewhere all day. I mean, how's that going to work? Whoa! So if you do that, that's the head in the sand approach. If you're negative about, if all you're focused on is the negative, then you're not opening yourself up to the possibilities, and you're also not skilling students up like we've talked about. And I don't believe, John, it's for the future, it's for now. Because what you described afterwards were not the future, it's the now.
Yeah.
So you're not skilling the students up for now. You're not giving them the skills. You're also, as you talked about, John, you're not getting them to think deeply about how this technology is working and what it's actually doing and what it means. So you're not doing any of that. And you're also not engaging them in discussions about what it means to learn.
No.
And that's going to go on to your second point, Niklas. So, you know, I'll let John speak about what he thinks about that now, and then we'll deal with the second point.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what you're saying here, like, we are educating our students for the now. I totally agree. Now I think about it, it's so limited. I mean, we don't know what the future is going to look like.
No.
And all we can do is give them a chance to learn from the tools that exist today. And I'm thinking like that. It's an interesting dilemma for the educator, at least, because maybe in some, you know, I'm just trying to think back to my time as a teacher. How did I work with my students? Yeah, some situations I want them to be able to work independently. You know, I want to see their own unique thoughts out of this, and in other situations, I want them to collaborate, and I don't want them to be limited to what they can collaborate with or what they can use as a tool. So to be able to take in an AI or take in a chatbot. And experiment with that and use it to strengthen their writing or to help them build an understanding of mathematics or construct a lab report. I mean, that's fantastic, because and I think the story that you, or the story that you told us about your father is exactly that there are certain tasks that, you know, they're sort of the jump through the hoop tasks. You know, I just need to do them, and I don't really need to necessarily understand all the nitty-gritty details of them. in order to do something that
if you're right,
I'm burned
yeah,
for.
if you're writing marketing emails, how many marketing emails have you guys wrote in your time? I mean, you don't need to learn any more about writing marketing emails, do you?
No.
So if a chat, you know, if an extension tool, you know, free tool, which is out there right now, and I'm using it right here, and so is my wife who runs her own business, and it can write most of that email.
Yeah.
Who cares about the learning in that? And
right.
you know, yeah. I mean, come on.
So yeah. So I think for advice maybe to educators right now is like you said, just let them, you know, experiment yourself, test it yourself, so that you at least understand what the limitations are to the system, and also what it can accomplish, so that you're prepared and understand what potentially could come into your classroom. You know, if you've set up a summative assessment, or if you have a student that's going to produce, you know, if you're in, you know, illustrative design, so that you see what the difference is, so that you're not just surprised or by it. So I think it's part of the what do you want to call it? The informal professional development package for educators today is the way that I would.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The way that I tried to.
Yeah. And I think we are in that flux. That suggests we're in a flux, and we are in a flux. And you should be in a flux in a way, shouldn't you? Because this goes back to a post I created a bit ago, which had some interesting comments on it. I don't think a lot of people have thought like this, but what I was seeing is that because of the rate of change here, you've seen an awful lot of pressure on systems, and an awful lot of pressure on professional development and management and change management. And when you look at that in an education context, these beasts of education, be they schools or systems, they work very slowly, and they exist in complex agendas. And to suddenly go, oh no, it's now about this, it's no longer about, you know, all the other things you've got to deal with. I'm afraid that doesn't work. You can't just go, oh, we'll throw everything else out the window and just talk about AI. You know, the average teacher's got 1,000 things to think about.
Yeah.
But can educators go from being reactive to proactive?
Yeah, and that's where I think John's talking about that informal PD. And that's where I believe putting that course out, that's one of the reasons I put that course out. I put a course out there because very early on, because I was sat there with my life getting consumed and taken over by AI. And in order to consummate my own thoughts, and in order to actually put things together which made sense of it for me and gave me a purpose in this whole sphere, that was the place I saw myself. I saw myself as going, I can put something out that an introductory teacher can access, an introductory as in introductory to AI, but also somebody who's played with it can start to challenge them further. That's why the course largely doesn't include my examples. It includes examples from educators all over the place who were all playing with it. So I was passing on that knowledge. It's about sharing knowledge, and it's also about, you know, it's about creating that community and creating that groundswell, but giving people confidence for that informal PD that you're talking about. And much of the PD that teachers do, the reality is most of the powerful PD is informal. It's not formal PD.
Yeah, I think that has to do with one of the other aspects that you took up here is the time, the resource aspect of it, that educators are so limited to what they can do when they're not in the classroom or designing, you know, their lessons and designing their assessments and thinking about how to provide feedback for their students and get them to, you know, go to the next level. That it's a time and resource kind of crisis. So the informal PD is the stuff that pops up in your social media. Like, ooh, this is interesting. Oh, I'm gonna check this out.
That article you read, that conversation you have, the corridor conversation. I just had, you know, the course that I put out there. I actually held back on that and putting it out. I actually had it ready before it went out, but I was like, this is over the Christmas period. Do I really want to be putting, I hope, and I thought, no, I better not put it out. I actually held off for a few days, so I was like, but it was my way of packaging this thing up into what do people need to know? What do people need to feel better, feel more confident? What do people need as a way in? If people have got a way in, what's the next step? What do they need? And in a way, people have said, oh, I've been back and made some more examples on there, but I really haven't changed it since. So people have gone, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? But then I still go back and go, there's people signing up every day. So, clearly, and I am time poor now, the term started, but it goes back to, if I did that, it might actually change what it is, and what it is a way in and a way of feeling confident that you can at least get the ball rolling. And I think that's really important when it comes to technology, is that fact there are many teachers out there who this is completely out of their comfort zone. And that is the reality. And the one thing we haven't really talked about, and is not talked about much, and I'm really interested in this discussion, is primary teachers, junior schools. Nobody's really talking about AI in that area. And what does that mean for those guys? From a teaching perspective, from a learning perspective. And once these issues around legality and all those things go out the window, and we don't actually talk about AI, we just use the tools, like, we talk about Google as if it's a product, as if it's a thing, but it actually is quite advanced technology, but we don't really talk about that, so once we start talking about AI tools like that, then how are we going to use it with junior schools, with a year 5, a year 6, as it would be like an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old? That would be really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, because I think there, just going back to the functionalities, if we look at the functionalities of ChatGPT, just being able to converse with a chatbot in, when you're 9 or 10 years old, you could ask it any question that pops into your head, and just think about the whole trying to foster creativity for students. It's like the possibilities are endless there. You can help them.
I think that bit there, John, is where I start to go off on one. So that's where I start to go, because if we're talking about that area, I think there's again, that's something that I'm challenging the research that's out there, because the research that is out there talks in the AI field talks about the reality that ChatGPT is just a skin on top of chatbots that exist. It's not really an advancement in technology, which it isn't in technological terms. It's not. It's something that's been going on years, but there's something different about it, isn't there?
Right.
The way you interact with it, the way you have this, you feel like you're having a conversation. And as I keep saying to people, I end up being polite to it. I don't know why, but I do. Please, thank you. Oh, why am I doing that? It doesn't care.
Well, it's polite back to you when you throw in those little comments. So I mean, why not?
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's polite back because you're polite to it. I'm not being a big to it, so I don't know. But I mean, it is that point of the tone it has sort of engages you in this sort of pleasant conversation, doesn't it? So there's something in there. But I think there's something in there that resonates with the way human beings like to interact. And if you talk about young kids, I think there will be enormous power in that. Because they will feel like they're having this conversation, which you feel like you have it. I go back to that thing of sat nav. To me, I don't care whether it's true or not, and I'm sure it's not true, but in my mind, if I don't do what my sat nav tells me to do, I'm sure it gets really irate with me. Turn right. No, turn right. I'm sure it does that.
And then feeds you the wrong directions afterwards, just to spite you, right?
When it tells you to do something and you don't do it, I'm sure it gets really frustrated with me. I'm positive it does. But AI never seems to get frustrated with it. It seems to placate your mood. It seems to go like, oh, I'm really sorry I got that wrong. I'll go back and reflect it. And then perhaps it's everything that human beings are not doing in their discussion. I don't know. But there's something in that that's attractive. And there's something in the interface as well, which I believe they're taken from that Google sort of way of working. Clean up the interface, just make it about enter something And then the flashing typewriter style of delivery is, it's watchable, isn't it? Oh, yeah. It's like, oh, what's going to come up next? So there's something. Now, whether somebody's engineered that from a UX perspective, I don't know. I'm not a UX expert, but I do find it fascinating. And I wonder when we advance with this, which is going to come quickly, whether we're still going to hold those values true. When it gets monetized and we have adverts on the side and we have all this kind of thing, are we going to lose some of that attraction? That will be interesting.
Yeah. I haven't thought about that, but yeah, I mean, that's the reason why you avoid some particular content.
There's a lot of real estate to sell.
Yeah.
There's a lot of real estate to sell on there.
Yeah. But I mean, I think for younger students, I think that this is that it could be one of those door openers for a lot of kids, who are sitting in class and they have that question that they're wondering about because their teacher said something really interesting, and they just need to ask it, but there isn't enough time, or they're just that kid that like, I think about my own children from time to time, that phase that I think all kids go through. They're like, well, but why? But why? And you're like, yeah, just put them into, and I mean, that's one of those situations. Yeah, it's just one of those situations where you can provide them with a tool that can also be, I'm thinking, it helps them build language skills. It helps them, learn about particular subject content that they're interested in. It sort of packages it in a way that keeps the learning interest, like keeps it going. It drives them.
And I think going back to your first example, John, I was talking to a colleague of mine the other day, Jared Johnson, who works in a school close to me, and he was talking about a student in his class that she was always the one that put her hand up all the time. I mean, excessively. She couldn't, because she just could not move on from a particular point until she fully understood it. Maybe she's got some sort of, learning difficulties. That's beside the point. The point is, for her, she could not move on to the next thing until she understood.
Right.
Now, sometimes that got kind of frustrating, but also frustrating for her as well, but also for the teacher.
Yeah.
But a chatbot has just become the best thing ever for her, because now she just sits there with a chatbot or with a Chrome extension on that has a chatbot in it, and immediately she's got that thing she doesn't quite understand. She sticks it in, and she's able to get clarification. And I'm afraid to say, I'm sorry to say, for any teachers out there, the chatbot can often explain it a bit better than you can. And we've got to face up to this reality. The chatbots can often do a better job in some things than we can. And there's nothing wrong in admitting that. We're not the holders of knowledge. That's not what we are as teachers. So yeah, you've seen an example there of exactly what you're talking about. That learning assistant, that personal assistant that's there for that particular student to be able to move at their pace through the learning, get the clarification they need. And yeah, if we go back to a junior school, primary school example, wow, that's going to be so powerful, isn't it? Just in that basic core elements of literacy, basic core elements of numeracy. How much time can you spend with this student over here at the detriment of the student over there?
Right. I think that's a great example. But and other opportunities, and I mean also dangers with tools like ChatGPT. I mean, what other opportunities do you see? How can educators use it to, make their life and education easier?
Yeah, and I think that goes through levels, Nicholas. It goes through that thing at a very basic level. It's same as any other industry. We can start to do those jobs more easily, quicker, more efficient, more effective, that take up teachers' time. Writing emails, whatever, all those low-level things that take up your time. They can do lots of that. They can do that better. As they get more sophisticated, they'll do that even better. I've got extensions on Chrome at the moment that thing that Gmail's always had, where it had thank you or whatever, those little buttons. This has buttons which you press and it reads the whole email and gives you a whole paragraph of an answer. Yes, thank you for inviting me to this, and it's just a little free extension. So I'm just clicking the button. I can't be bothered writing that, you know, or ChatGPT, you know, you're feeding in that you want to write an email that's going to 5 different audiences on a similar theme. You just tell it to do that and it'll write all the 5 different emails. So writing lesson plans, it can do that. Although, yeah, I will hazard some caution on that. The writing things like lesson plans is great for giving you ideation, but don't forget, ChatGPT needs to be, when it's used like that, as an ideation tool, because what it's producing is pretty bland, you know, but it's giving you the ideas, and that's how I use it. So I was sat there in face-to-face PD yesterday in a whole course that I'm teaching, and I sat there, and as the presenter's talking about things, I'm actually sat with ChatGPT feeding it into their student agency. I can't remember what else we were talking about, but whatever they were talking on, natural evidence, still the day. How does student agency and natural evidence fit together? Give me outlines, give me examples, and then I'm feeding it in, give me an outline for a presentation so I can then present it to my kids. So as these theories are being talked about and these issues are brought up within a professional development, I'm then using this chatbot assistant to feed it into what I need or what I think I need for my practice. Do I need my own notes? Do I need materials to teach? So at that level, I'm distilling information and I'm putting it elsewhere to give me an outline to work from. That's what that gave me, an outline. And then I was able to go into PowerPoint and use the AI within there to make the PowerPoint look better. So that's at that low level. Then we get into the next level, which is how can you sort of combine different AIs or use AI technology in more sophisticated ways to enhance your practice. Now, that could be some of those examples you talked about, where you are actually bringing it into the classroom, either as a teacher or with learners or both, to start to go, well, what are the possibilities now? You know, how can we dream big? Can we have a whole series of exercises that take us into AI and out of AI, and an image generator here then allows us to write a story about those images we've created, which then we'll ideate first within ChatGPT, and then we'll bring it across, and then we'll synthesize all the things that it's produced, decide which is the best, bring it all together, and then we'll create, and we'll have the story from there. But then we've got to do his own evaluation, which takes us away from ChatGPT, and that becomes a multi-layered, complex set of skills of analysis, synthesis, reading, writing, image generation, engineering prompts, all those kinds of things. And then lastly, I suppose, is going, okay, so now we've dreamed big, what can it do in terms of assessment and those kinds of things, which we've not really talked about yet, and perhaps that's something we'll go into in a bit. But in an assessment field, there's all sorts of possibilities. Some of that's low level and some of that's high level. But in teaching and learning, we've got the low level and we've got the more complex things. But then there are all other areas of AI that we haven't really touched on, that are not chatbots, where you start to think of research that's going on at the moment. For instance, putting cameras all over rooms and audio recorders that then get trained on particular students' voice, pick up all their conversations and all their discussions they have, feed it all in, distill all that, and then you can show how our kids learn or not learn particular things that have happened in the classroom without you setting an assessment. It's just happening as your class progresses. So you set a task, all these recordings are going on, it's picking up all the data, it's distilling all this data. It can say, this student here has done this student exhibited learning here, it marks it from the rubric. There you go.
I mean, it sounds like what you're describing almost sounds like sci-fi, in that sense. But at the same time, it's reality. Yeah. And that's the beauty of it, that these, that AI is at the state where it is, that it can really, really help education. I'm thinking the whole formative assessment aspect of that learning, assessment for learning requires these kinds of micro interactions. in order for it to work. Oftentimes that when teachers are using formative assessments, it requires them to almost stop the process and go in and interact and give feedback. But here you can almost let the process just kind of flow, and then the teacher can jump in when it's needed, exactly when it's needed, or at least closer to that point. If
the idea of assessment, what are you seeing, John, in terms of how the media portrays threats to assessment, or the reality of assessment now that we've got ChatGPT?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at Sweden right now, it's just people are just talking about cheating and plagiarism, and how do we detect this? How are essay writings and take home assignments and homeworks going to be affected? And so that's where it's sort of gotten stuck. And if I look outwards, I think that's also what we're seeing in other countries, sort of the same kind of process. And you talked a little bit about the whole banning and effect. And I mean, if we look at what was it, New York, that had public schools had banned ChatGPT, and then almost a few days after, it was Los Angeles, I think, that had done the same. And it's like, I could be wrong. Someone can fact check me later.
I do find that quite strange. I do find that quite strange in California. So you can buy and smoke weed, but you can't use a chatbot in school. That's a little bit strange, isn't it? It's a little dichotomy going on.
Yeah. Well, wow. One helps you, and the other one hinders, right? Something.
Maybe, yeah. Don't know.
Depending on who you talk to. No, so I mean, I think what we're seeing is that the discussion right now is how do we wrestle with essay writing? How do we wrestle with assignments that are done remotely and at home, to control and have an idea of who actually wrote this? That's what a lot of educators are I think struggling with, and I think a lot of school leaders as well, and decision makers, which is, I'm not going to get ahead of myself, but my educator's heart, that deep inside me, it's like, oh no, this is why are we talking about this?
And Nick, are you observing the same discussions in Australia, or is it something different?
Well, it's a reality, isn't it? We're not going to get away from this. This is a reality. The reality is that there are going to be some students out there, some young people out there, who are going to choose to use AI to a certain degree, which impacts on their capacity to learn, and in some cases completely, or means totally, that they have not learned anything about that subject. In other words, to transfer that from learning to assessment, they've just used AI and it's done the whole work for them. They've not even read what it said. They've not changed what it said. They've just used it. So they've completely plagiarized. Yeah. And then there's going to be every stage that peels that back right to the point of where you can argue that the AI has been used as a tool, but the student has still shown that they've learned something, and therefore it's not plagiarism. So we've got it's a continuum, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that is a reality. However, take away AI before AI existed. Did students not pay tutors to do their work for them, or to help them with their work?
Right. Did
students not copy from other students? Because I did some really good copying when I was a student. I was really good at it. Did students not get their parents to do their homework, big brother to do their homework, and we go on and on. Right. So, I mean, very well, it would take you less than 5 minutes to find somebody out there who will write that essay for you for a couple of €100, dollar, whatever currency you're talking.
Yeah.
So the reality is that plagiarism, cheating of any kind, exists. Does this make it easier to cheat? Yep, it does. Does it make it cheaper to cheat? Yeah, it probably does.
Yeah.
Although if you want to get onto ChatGPT now, you probably have to pay $20 a month to actually get it to work for you, because getting on is quite hard.
Right, unless you're hitting it at that those 2 minutes when it's not overloaded.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, the reality is it makes it easier. Yeah. So therefore, we've got to deal with the fear it puts in people. That's the first thing we've got to deal with. And we've got to deal with the reality that it makes it easier to cheat. So how do you do that? Okay, we can ban. Does that do the job? If we're dealing with homework and you're banning in a school, you're not banning somebody's home internet, are you? So that's not going to work there. That doesn't work. If we're talking about assessments and the way we do assessments, if your assessment is set up that in such a way that a chatbot can give the student the answer, then arguably there's something wrong with the assessment, isn't there?
It might not be the best assessment, no.
Okay. And as you guys know, if we're talking about exams, there are actually ways around stopping exams or people taking exams accessing content from outside what they're supposed to be looking at. So there are measures around that can happen. So I don't think exams is really the issue, what we're looking at here. Although when we get into online exams, what higher education is facing, that's a different dilemma altogether. So, there are things to think of there. So when we start talking about assessments, I think it comes down to the reality that we have to think differently about what we're assessing and how we're assessing. And then that comes into what we actually value in the process. And that's a really interesting discussion. But there is a short term for me. I've been working right with teachers right now. There's a short term and a long term. So in the short term, we have to deal with situations we've got now. We have to bear in mind that teachers have workloads. If you're asking them to redo all their assessments that they've already done for the year, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
I urge teachers to audit their assessments and look to change them. But for some teachers, that's a massive job. For some teachers, that's a small job. So what can you do immediately? You could leave the assessment in the same way, or largely the same as it is at the moment, which means the student can cheat, and then you can add on something which allows you to see whether they have cheated or not, or used AI in this case, and to see whether they understand it is the reality. So an example may be you may have a science task or a science project where they're going off and researching particular areas. I don't know. One we were looking at today was gravity. They had to research gravity. And it was a whole project and it was 30% of the overall marks. They could have done all the existing assignment on ChatGPT. They could do it all. Okay. So instead of overhauling the whole thing in the short term, why not leave that existing assessment like that, reduce it to certain percentage, 20%, and go, there's an extra 10% where you have to come and do something else. Either defend it face to face.
Yeah.
But that's time consuming and that's logistics behind it. That's one way.
Right.
You have to give some presentation in class where you're able to stop the technology being used. You can see it's not being used. That could be another way, but that's also time consuming, heavy resources, those kinds of things. You could ask them to write an evaluation where they're not allowed to use technology to do that, or they're only allowed to use certain technologies and monitor that. You could do that. They don't sound very future thinking. They don't forward thinking. They sound quite restrictive practices. But I'm talking about the short term. That's what can happen right now.
Right.
Yeah. Until you re-engineer those tasks so they become harder to have AI and harder to plagiarize. So that's an example right there of what can happen now. So when we talk about assessment on that scale, those measures that teachers can put in place are what can happen in terms of dealing with their assessment design and dealing with the realities of students plagiarizing. So how putting that back to you, do you see that as being workable in the short term, or do you think from your perspective there are other ways that that could happen?
I mean, I think in the short term, yeah, that's those are the things that have to occur, because like you said, teachers don't have an unlimited amount of time to redo all the assignments and all the assessments that they've created potentially over the course of their careers, you know, and now are implementing, and especially if it was interesting, the article that was published today in this that I talked about earlier in Us Teachers or We Teachers, the suggestion was actually the article took up the national exams here in Sweden, and that there's a large writing component to them that now needs to be that they've the National Agency for for Education, Skolverket, produces these exams, and they have now said everything's going to be digital. So these kids are supposed to write on computers and write these things, and the concern is that there might be some ChatGPT, you know, or chatbots being engaged. And in this article, it was taken up that maybe we should have the oral component, the speaking component, way more heavily. And yeah, that's a, like you said, it's a potential strategy, but out of a logistics, you know, scheduling kind of aspect, it's going to be a nightmare. I mean, it already is, because there is a speaking component that exists, and that throws off all the other coursework, because you have to take that time to individually meet with kids and talk with them so that you understand where they are. And I think kind of around now, I've talked around it a little bit, but the short term, yeah, those are maybe the things that we have to do, but in the long term, you know, it's going to be to rethink, like you said. I completely agree. Rethink what we're doing with the assessment practices that we have, and in particular, you know, what summative aspects do we want to retain, so versus which ones do we have to sort of remove, and identify that as a not as individual educators in our own classrooms, but as educators as a whole, to talk about this, so that it doesn't become this I do this thing and you do this thing. And I mean, you've worked in schools long enough to know that kids talk with each other.
Peer group pressure is the strongest pressure, and in on that point there, though, John, is that actually raises a big question about professional development, doesn't it? How skilled are teachers in learning and assessment design? So we talked about learning before, in the way you're going to sit beside students, how your practice is, what you value in your practice, the way you conduct the way you conduct yourself in a teaching environment, how that works. And that's questions online and face to face. And how skilled are teachers at that? And how skilled are some teachers at that compared to others? How much professional development have teachers had? Do they need to revisit that? Or now, is there a need to engage with that for some teachers, because they didn't engage with it when they were given that professional development before? They still went back to sitting behind their desk, because that's how they've always done it. What does this mean for teacher training institutes as regards how they train teachers? Does that change? And assessment designs actually, quite a complex area. It's, if you go and look at understanding by design as a process, and you look at how that works, lots of teachers know that. I'm not sure that lots of teachers actually do that particularly well, though, but they know what it is. When you talk to teachers, when I talk to teachers, most teachers know what that is. But when I see it happen, I go, And indeed, at a university level, sometimes I go, that's a bit strange. But I think, apart from that, if we look at more holistically, I think there's a bigger question here, and that's about how much trust do we actually have in students? Do we really have to concern ourselves with the minority of kids who are cheating? Is that what we're going to focus on? Because isn't that teaching to the lowest denominator? Isn't that concerning ourselves with the lowest denominator? if we're going to admit that people have always cheated, then we didn't really do a lot about that before, did we? So why are we so obsessed with doing something about it now? And why does that cause this, oh, we've got to ban everything and let's throw it all out the window. Let's smash up the machines like the Luddites did because we can't have the printing presses taking over the jobs. You know, what are we talking about here? That's just mind-blowing, that sort of perspective, isn't it? It just, I go, what planet are people on? So the reality is that if we're going to deal with this in a sensible way and go, there are these who are going to cheat, there are these people who may cheat given certain circumstances, and that's a real area to talk about. And then there's these up here who are never going to cheat because they value the learning. So this bit in the middle is your core bit, isn't it? This bit here. So I'll share some of these sort of discussions that I'm having, and these are real. Kids are under pressure in a lot of parts of education, especially secondary school education, senior secondary school education. In the UK, it was the same. I don't know what it's like in Sweden, but I imagine it's the same.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
The pressure comes in those last couple of years, doesn't it? And then it happens here in Australia as well. So they get to a point, they get under pressure. They start to panic when it gets near deadlines. They get to panic when it starts to get near exam time, the end of the year. What kid that's in that middle bit, how many of those kids are going to go, well, here's an easy option out. ChatGPT will do I'll do the assessment, bang, and I've cheated now. Or it'll do some of it. Or, you know, whatever, all those on the continuum. How many does it push into that area? Now, that's the real risk here. So therefore, you get a bigger amount of kids who are now plagiarizing. Okay, so that's real. So how do we deal with that? Well, do we deal with that by going, let's ban the whole thing? That's back to the old argument. Or do we deal with that by going, let's educate kids about what is acceptable here and not acceptable? And do we have practices around knowing what their voice is, back to the same conversation we had before, what their quality of work is, what we see in their writing style that's going to tell us that they have done that. And all those measures should limit the amount of chances and risks that those kids take to do that assessment. And then redesigning assessment tasks to limit the impact of that also means that a lot of those kids will go, well, there's no point, because that bit of it is only 10 or 20%. So knock it out, letting ChatGPT do it, it's not going to actually gain me much at all. I'm still going to have to go in and do 30% of it and defend it. And if I don't know the stuff, then I've got no chance. You know? So the trust comes into it by having open discussions with students, by getting them to understand that this is a learning process and valuing the learning. You've got to, if you're doing this physics course, you've got to know this stuff. You've got to know it. And why have you got to know it? Because you've signed up for this course. You should want to learn this stuff, or it goes on to your future career aspirations, whatever you're talking about. But then if we peel that back further, we get into that whole discussion about, is a lot of education forcing young people to do things they really don't want to do? And that's a whole kind of worms.
That's a whole bag.
Or should we move into more of student agency, where we're going, kids should do more of what they're passionate about and being able to display their love of learning in a different way, and getting them to do more of what they like and less of what they have to. And we could spend a whole day talking about that one.
It's a real dilemma. I think that, like you said, if we come back to the students in the middle, where they might use this service or might use chatbots or AI to help them, but might not. I mean, you said that we can educate them. I mean, about what it's all about. Sort of get into the ethics of using this and what does it really mean. I mean, is that? I'm just playing devil's advocate now. Of course. Is that being idealistic? Are we being too? Are we?
On its own, if you were just doing that, I think you are being idealistic. If you think that that's the only thing that's going to make the difference, then you're fooling yourself. But it'll certainly make a difference to some students. And then with the other things we talked about, so it's almost like a multifaceted way of dealing with this, isn't it? And it's never simple. This thing is not simple.
No.
The reality is this has blown the doors off education as we know it, hasn't it? To unravel several issues that we've all been going, oh, that really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that we're forcing kids to do subjects they don't want to do. Well, maybe it does matter, maybe it doesn't, but it's a discussion to have, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, we put a lot of, obviously, a lot of response into teachers here, but how can school leaders support teachers in this change?
Yeah.
And I think that comes down to the professional development, doesn't it, Nicholas? It comes down to that thing of going, in the longer term, there's got to be plans put in place to, make teachers aware, give them time to change assessment design, change their assessments, study effective assessment design, study effective learning design, put that into practice in their context, work with students and build relationships. That's all going to take time. If anybody thinks that they're going to if anybody claims out there, and there will be some people already going, we know the answer to all this, our school is doing it magnificently. I'd be very, very doubtful of that. This takes longer time than you think, and this year will be really, really messy. I think it'll be messy across the world, and we've just got to accept that's going to happen. And that's why the short term is about damage limitation for me. And in that time, we're sorting ourselves out. We're starting to clear space to be able to have more professional development, more discussions, more understanding of the implications. The trouble with that is that the whole area is moving so fast that as soon as you're talking about ChatGPT 3.5 now, what's 4 going to bring us? What happens when I'm already using tools now that combine AI and search together, where the whole thing of, well, you can't reference your sources. Well, you actually can. They just do that, So there's tools that just do that right now. So when we've got that combination, that goes out the window. So it's almost like the discussions become more complex day by day, or someone finds another use for it, or someone provides another example. So, but you can only deal with what's there now. That's what I keep saying. Forget about what it's coming, we'll deal with now. The reality is, no matter how it advances, it's still coming back to those core things. What do we value in education? What is at the heart of what are we doing? What's the most important skills we can teach our kids? And to me, that comes down to 4 things. Maybe 5, maybe 6. No. Yeah, maybe a whole curriculum. No. Yeah. It comes down to 4, probably 5. Oh. Maybe 6. No, 4 things. Literacy, numeracy. You need literacy. You need to be literate. But there are questions as to what literate is as well. You need to be numerate to a certain extent, and you then need critical and creative thinking. I think my 5th would be probably problem solving, and maybe empathy as a 6th as well. But it's those 4 things realistically, and especially in an AI world, the critical thinking is so vital. If you're going to take what a chatbot gives you and go, this is gospel, you're using it in the wrong way.
Yeah, you're in for a shock.
If you're not looking through it and going, even that email it writes for you, if you're not analyzing what it says and then going, actually that bit doesn't work, that bit there needs some better explanation. If you're not doing that, then I'm sorry, you're just not using it in the right way, and you're just not critically thinking, and you're letting it do the learning for you in that education context. That's the difference. Creative thinking, that's where we start talking about image generators and how much are you creatively thinking about your prompts. You're not just putting anything in, you're actually engineering them and going, what do I want from that? And then we get into this whole idea of creativity around, is it creative to be doing that? Oh, that's a whole area there.
Yeah, I mean it's you that created the prompt, you're the creative person, or right.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? But critical thinking is definitely where the key element in chatbots there, and you've got to look at educators have to ask themselves, how much are we teaching kids critical thinking?
Yeah.
How much are we doing that?
Yeah. I think, Niklas, if we come back to, because you'd said about school leaders, what can school leaders do and in terms of professional development? I also thought about what ends up happening. I don't know, maybe this is something very unique to Sweden. Is that there's a lot of silo thinking, that an organization is its organization. We have our ideas. We only, we talk within our institution, and to the spread of that knowledge and the discussion of that knowledge and opening up for dialogue is sometimes difficult, I think. I mean, I know that there are
outside the school or outside education generally.
Outside the school and maybe even outside outside of education in general, that a lot of times the focus is on how the organization, the school organization, is going to thrive. What are we doing with our pedagogical methods and strategies that we've developed and adhere to, and I think that's something that maybe in this talk about AI ends up becoming more of a silo think that I say that a school maybe says we're doing this, and the school down the street is doing something completely different, because they really haven't thought about extending.
Goes back to what I talked about earlier in educators owning this and creating that groundswell. I hope to involve leaders within that, and indeed within my networks there are many leaders. I'm not sure there are some principals, but there are leaders definitely.
Yeah.
Middle leaders and senior leaders within that. But I think you're right in terms of schools are really guilty a lot of the time, not just in Sweden, in the UK and in Australia, and they can argue that that's because they're time poor, but they're guilty of being very, very insular, and as much as some educators work hard to break that mold, and some leaders work hard to break that mold in terms of they will reach out to community. Sometimes it's still a bit of, these are the walls of the school, this is what we do, this is education.
Yeah,
that's different. And there are some models out there that break those traditions, but yes, it comes back to the thing of, this is school, that's not school.
Right.
And I think you have to try and break down those things. But I think if we're looking at what can be done as regards AI from a leader perspective, I think you've got to be positive as a leader. So that means you're going to have to educate yourself a bit. If you're a principal of a school and you've not played with ChatGPT and you're not continuing to play with it, and you're not at least listening to some of the discourse around it, then that's head in the sand, isn't it? Because this is reality. This is now. That's like a principal without a mobile phone, isn't it?
Right.
But having said that, I still meet principals who go, well, I'm not very good with a computer. This is not 1975. That is not, you should not be saying that. I'm not very good with the computer. I'm not very good with technology. You're getting X numbers of thousands of dollars, euros, whatever. That's like saying I'm not very good with people, isn't it, in that job? I mean, that's as powerful as it is. You may not be very good with it, but don't tell people you're not very good with it. I don't think that's a valid thing to be saying, but I still hear it. So if you're going to go with that head in the sand, then that's not sending the right positive message out to the teachers in your community. It's not sending the right message out realistically to the parents. And I think that message needs to be out there. I think it needs, at this stage right now, it needs open dialogue. That's what it needs. If you've not got banning going on, you need to be having open dialogue as to what you see as the issues, what are your perspective on it, what are you doing in schools, what are you trying to achieve, what do you realize is happening? And in doing that, you can start to make parents realize that there is a different discussion than what they're seeing in the media, and you can make them realize that there are positives to this and that they play a part in this as well. Because if you're a parent of a student that is, as we just talked about before, under pressure, coming towards that deadline, and he's in that middle bit, but maybe risking cheating, and that kid knows that their parents is also looking out for that as well. that's going to limit some of that as well. So you bring them on board, you make them part of the community.
Yeah,
now that can be a tough gig. Can be a tough gig.
Yeah, and I think that speaks a lot to this, that we're in this together. You know, that kind of okay, as a school leader, as a teacher, as parents, as students, as educational technology providers, we have to be talking with one another about what's happening. How do we deal with this?
Yes.
So that it's not happening in one area, and the discussion kind of goes like it's been in the media, that it's sort of had a particular focus, whereas the reality of it is something completely different.
Well, I'm sure you've spoken to a lot of people who have actually no clue what you're talking about at all, because it's got no use, or they don't think it's got any use in their life. If they, and it still shocks me. I'm going, oh yeah, AI, and they're going, oh, okay, what's that? ChatGPT. Oh yeah, I saw that thing in the paper. No idea what you're talking about at all.
Yeah.
But if they've got a kid at the school, they need to be waking up that that's important to them at the very least. In that context, it's really important. So I think, that letter home, that bed in your newsletter of what you're doing, inviting, the conversation, dealing with the pushback, because there will be some parents who go, whoa, I don't want any of that. That's cheating. Yeah, well, let's have a discussion about that then. Let's make you aware that, there are cheating issues, but there are also these issues as well. And all the things we've discussed tonight and all the positives around this can also be part of that discussion. So that's the responsibility of leaders. The responsibility of leaders is to work with experts within their school, or people that are championing this. And that's not just experts like me who, live and breathe this. I'm talking about the teachers that have been on this early on, or are passionate about this, the champions out there, and the students. Bring students into the mix, because I guarantee that's where the power comes. And that's my PhD research. You empower students, they will show you what's happening. They'll show you the realities. And let's have that open forum. Let's all learn from each other, because teachers will get their eyes open to how students see this. My own kids, I've got a 15 and a 13-year-old, they couldn't care less about ChatGPT or AI until they went back to school. We have the summer holidays over Christmas. They went back to school at the end of January, start of February. Suddenly, they now care. Because it was TikTok was far more useful to them, and Snapchat was far more useful to them until they went back to school. Now it's like, oh, this is useful to me now. So,
well, that's quite human, I think, in that sense. We're all that way. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, as soon as it becomes useful, then it's important. Or challenges the way that the current status is at the time.
I think, tagging on to that and getting back to the banning thing, I think while you've got banning in place, it allows those leaders to not deal with it. And to actually not think about it at all. And I think that means that effectively they very much promote that sleepwalking mentality I talked about before. Because while ever that ban's going on, does it go on for 3 months, 6 months, a year? That's sleepwalking, because the movement's growing. 100 million users in a month. It's quite clear that it's growing. So, while ever that's happening, that's sleepwalking, isn't it? You're not being proactive. You're too late. So, how are you going to deal with it? And then it's suddenly going to be an issue when everybody's done amazing on all their assessment pieces. Oh, why has that happened? They've all got amazing assessment pieces. Oh, how much have they learned then? Oh, no idea. They've all got good grades though.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Amazingly, how 2 hours
just kind of up and vanishes.
Yeah, totally.
When we get into it, start talking about the important issues.
Have we covered everything? Or what points did you have on that original email that we haven't covered?
I think we probably have about 20 more points, that are kicking around here. But this is fantastic, because it's fantastic. But thanks so much for talking with us, hanging out with us today, or this evening. Dr. Nick Jackson. Fantastic.
Amazing.
Yeah, this has been so much fun. We have to do this again.
And it's also learning as well, gentlemen. I learn every time I do these talks because I get to, think through the issues that are facing both in your job, in the conversations you have. But if you get to talk about things, it's almost like being a teacher, isn't it? The best form of learning is to teach. So if you get into, to distill your thoughts and bring them together and face these questions, you get to relate all the topics together. And that to me is where you get to really comprehend what this is about. And that's why I think the power is in educators to be able to, spend that time and bring these things together and bring people along on the journey. And that's what's going to make this the most powerful changes we've maybe ever seen. Ooh, big prediction there.
Yeah.
Certainly in my lifetime.